All right. So I'm super excited to be here today and be able to talk to you about scaling React development, specifically with NX. So before starting, let me first introduce myself. My name is Juri Strumpflohner. I'm a Google developer expert in web technologies. I'm also an instructor at Egghead and Cypress ambassador. So right now I work at Novel as a JavaScript architect and engineering manager. And we at Novel kind of try to help teams out there learn, grow, and be successful. And we do that by helping planning the roadmaps, identify technical constraints. We also provide trainings at workshops, for instance, at conferences or talks at conferences, such as I do right now. We also, however, want, or what I prefer way to work at is like as an embedded part of your team where we can identify things as they come up. So how do we scale development, especially with large teams, and specifically from a technical perspective purely? And so I identified basically those three pillars, basically drive and automate good architecture, then also have modern tools at hand, and because like an improved developer experience will make our developers more productive, and finally speed in general. And I would like to talk to you mostly about NX today, which is our open source dev tool designed for monorepos, but it also works without monorepos actually pretty well. So this is basically the structure which you usually get when you generate a new project, right? So what I call this is like kind of monolithic structure. So you have that application, you have the different types of folders, where each of those folders kind of represents a functionality and a feature boundary usually. Now with NX, it's a bit different. So there we have the building blocks of apps and libraries. Now the application, as you can see here, sits at the very top, and then there are the single libraries down there. And the reason for that is it leads to a better architecture in general, because like libraries represent a much stronger boundary than just folders. With folders, it's very difficult to actually control what like can be exported and also signal what can be exported by other developers. And so in NX, what you have usually is a very thin application at the very top, and then you have like a lot of those well-defined like workspace libraries where the actual logic sits. And those workspace libraries don't really need to be published anywhere. They can, but they can just like live within the workspace, and the application just links it. And so in the end, application, if you want, is really just like the deployable, and then the logic is actually down in those libraries. And what often happens out of that situation is that people start creating multiple of those applications and just like pick the libraries they actually need. And this, for instance, allows you to deploy the same kind of infrastructure multiple times and even scale it in a different way. Because like we might want to scale the public facing part much more than maybe the administrative part, which is just like used by a couple of users. But really today, I would like to go more hands-on and actually show you what it is like to work with NX. And so to get started, of course, like you just install NX Workspace, and this is done by create NX Workspace. You give it a name, let's say React Summit. And I also pass here a package manager, which in this case is yarn, but it could also be pnpm or npm. And so this now installs the NX Workspace basically setup. And there we get a couple questions asked. So we can just start with an empty workspace, but we can also use one of those presets, which are pretty handy as they are already pre-configured. And so we choose React, and we can give it a name demo app, for instance. And now we have like a couple more questions, like which styling type we want to use and so on. Now I'm going to interrupt this here because like I have already done this and I want to save us some npm install time. So this is what a generated workspace looks like. So you can see that apps and libs folder, which I mentioned before. So actually, if I open this, we already have that courses app generated for us when we did set up that workspace. This is a React application. And then we have also that end-to-end test set up for us, which in this case is Cypress-based and already configured to test our courses application. The libraries folder is still empty. So in order to start this, I can actually just do yarn start, or the NX equivalent would be your NX serve, and courses, which is my course application. So then if I go to localhost 4200, I can actually see the application being served up once it is compiled and booted. And so this is here my welcome to courses app. Now, right now, I don't have any libraries. And that's actually another very strong point of NX is it has those generators. And so what I can do is I can write NX generate or G for generate, now React, which is the plugin, and then library for the library we want to execute. And let's call this course item, which is our library we want to generate. And I could provide here more options to customize the generation part, but for now, let's go with the defaults. And so what you see now here is we get that course item library generated for us, which has this kind of structure. There are the config files. Then there's the source folder, which has the index.js file here, which is kind of the public API. And here's actually what you want to export for others to consume, while everything that lives inside that lib folder here is just private to that library. And we also have here kind of handy a component already generated for us. Now, the very interesting part here is that in the tsconfig base path down here in the config file, we got already like a TypeScript path mapping set up for us. And so this allows us to very easily import that library into other applications without actually using the fixed path or the relative path to them. So let me go to the courses here. Let's open up here the app.tsx file. And let's remove all that part here, which we don't really need for now. And so what I want to do here is actually import our course item. And so you can see I can import it with that prefix here, which we just saw before. So it really looks like if this was a publishable library, but rather it got actually just linked from within the workspace. And then we reference it here. And now obviously if I start that again, we'll now see how that is being linked into our application. So if I go here and refresh, we now see our course item has been rendered directly inside the app. The other interesting part is also that NX internally tracks the dependencies and how things relate to each other. So I can use the dep graph here command to actually visualize those dependencies, which NX internally has. And so here, for instance, this is the current situation which we have. We have the courses app. Then we have kind of an implicit dependency to that end-to-end testing part, which tests our courses app. And then we have the course item library, which the course app uses. This is very handy, especially as our workspace grows. So let's explore that. What we could do, for instance, is create a public-facing Next.js application. So in order to do that, we can install the Narwhal Next plugin. And by the way, these are plugins we provide already, but there are tons of community plugins for the variety of use cases. So definitely check out those as well. So now we got Narwhal Next installed, and we could generate now the application. Now again, I could use the command line, but it's much more handy sometimes to use the NX console Visual Studio Code plugin. That allows me to run the generate here, and we see all the possible generators here. And so I want to go with Narwhal Next for generating a Next application. Let's give it a name public. And here the styling can remain the same. We still want a Cypress test runner, ESLint, and also Jest for testing. And down here you can see a preview of what would actually be executed whenever I execute a command. So you can also learn about the new commands down here. So let's just run this. So it will generate my new application. And while this installs, let's go over here and actually explore what gets generated. So we have the courses app. And now you can see we also have that public app. So this is a Next.js application. We see here the pages. Let's, for instance, go to the index page here. And again, let's remove here all those things which you don't really need. And we will do the same here to insert basically our course item. So again, I import it the same way as a reference within a Next.js app. So now let's boot our Next.js application. So I do yarn serve public, which is our Next app. And you can also see like the uniformity like of the commands. They're always the same regardless of whether you use like a React setup, a backend node setup, or here a Next.js application, which is also very important in terms of like the learning that the team has to do as you scale. And so now you see here the public application are being served. So this is our Next app, which also uses that course item. And in fact, we could explore the dependency graph again. So if I use a Next dep graph, we can boot it up here. And now the situation looks quite different because like now we have the courses application and the public application, both have their end-to-end tests and both reference here the course item. So let's generate a couple more libraries just like to see how that dependency graph evolves. So again, I'm using here the NX console, and I want to, for instance, just like generate a workspace library. Let's call it core, which isn't really specific to any framework. So this could even be shared between frameworks or even between a backend and a front end. And so now we got that core library generated. I also want to generate a new library, which this time is a React library. And I call it coupons. This time I want to structure that under an admin directory because like this will be a library which I want to use from within my admin part of the application. And then I want to have another one, which is sales, which is the one I want to use again within the admin directory. All right, and so if we close this and I reduce here the window a bit, so we can now see that we have in the libraries folder that admin, coupons, and sales, which are both libraries, and the core library. If we use the dependency graph again, we will see that the structure changed a bit again, because like now we have the libraries, the applications that reference that course item library down here, but then we have those 3 libraries which sit there but are not really connected yet. So let's do that. Let's go and here into the application. So let's first go into the coupons part actually and reference our core library in here. So we'll import a core and just like call it in here. The same for the sales. So we will reference it here as well. And then finally we go up here into the courses app and we reference it from within our application. And so now they are connected. We can actually go here and again start the dependency graph, and now we should see the actual connections between all those libraries, right? So we see now the courses app references admin coupons, admin sales, and the core, and the public part and the course part share that course item down there. Now this is a very nice setup already. What you might want to do at some point, however, as your workspace grows, is you might want to kind of impose restrictions, right? So for instance, you don't want to have the public part import some admin sales library. And as your workspace grows, this becomes really important. And so in the next, there's a way to actually impose those restrictions. And so first of all, what you need to do is you kind of need to assign tags to those libraries and applications. And so we can go in here in the NX.json configuration, and we can here start assigning tags. So first of all, these are just arbitrary strings, so you can really define them how you want. I usually use a prefix and a suffix here. And so what I do here, for instance, for the apps, I just like give them the type application. Next, I define type feature, which is for like our admin coupons, sales, and course item, which kind of represent an encapsulated feature within our workspace. Then I have a type utility, which is that core, which is really something that can be shared across various libraries, just like general utility functionality. And then I can give also scopes. So I just like define another tag, which I call scope, and in this case, admin for all the admin related parts up here. And the same for scope public for all the public part down here. And finally, we will also have something that is shared, right? Like for instance, the course item and the core parts are really shared. So I give them the shared tag here. Now we need to impose the restrictions, and we can do that via the linting. So if we go into the eslint.rc file, we have here that enforce module boundaries rules, which is provided by NX. And so in here you can define the constraints. So we can start by saying, for instance, a library from type utility can only really reference another type of utility. So you don't want to have a utility library reference a feature library, but rather vice versa, right? That feature libraries might be able to import utilities. And so next we can actually define the feature ones. So again, type feature can reference other features and type utilities. Then for the scopes, we can say scope admin can only reference scope admin. And finally, scope public can only reference scope public. So in this way, we separate the different scopes of our workspace. And obviously, we also need to add some scope shared here, because like the course item and also the core utility in general here might be shared among those different kind of scopes within our workspace. So how can we test that? With the linting actually. And so let's first break the rule. So let's go in our Next.js application up here. Let's go into the index.ts and let's import the admin sales. So now we created basically a connection from public to the admin sales, which is prohibited by the linting rules. And so if I now run nx lint public, which is our public Next.js app, it starts the linting. And what you will see now is an error basically on our index.ts file, which says like a project tagged scope public can only really depend on libraries tagged scope public or scope shared. You also see it direct in the editor. Sometimes Visual Studio is a bit slow to actually refresh the scopes once you define them, but you also would see it direct in here. And so this is obviously a big advantage. So let me actually remove that to have our linting work again. This is a big advantage because like this allows you to control your architecture as it grows. The next part is obviously speed. So definitely as you grow and as you want to scale your workspace, you cannot really build everything every time, right? Like if you change something down here, you cannot really just like build whatever is connected to it. So NX has a so-called affected command. But first, let me commit all these parts and let's simulate we are developing a feature. So let's check out a new branch, my feature. And now in here, I'm going to make a change, let's say in the course item library. So let's go here to course item in here. And let's actually just like say, welcome to course item, like this. So we made a change. And now NX can use the dependency graph to figure out what it needs to retest and relint and rebuild. And that can be done by the so-called NX affected commands. And we can actually also apply that to the depth graph. So if I say affected depth graph, you can now see a subsection of the graph which would be affected by the commands. We can also see all of them. You see them colored a bit differently. So obviously NX figures out like if this changes, it doesn't need to build or test this one, but just like the paths that go upwards. And so in fact, like if we have a look here and I execute yarn NX affected test, it will only really execute these three of the libraries and execute a test for those. The interesting part is also if I rerun this, there's another concept that improves speed, which is our caching. So if I rerun this, you see it is immediate because like all the three projects got taken out of the cache. Now this cache by default just lives locally. So in the node module folders.cache.nx, there's the caching actually, which figures out like what it needs to rebuild. But you can distribute that and you can go directly, for instance, to NX Cloud. If I go to nx.app, you can connect the workspace. And I just like click here once I'm logged in, connect workspace. I don't have NX Cloud, so I'm just using the command here to install it since I'm using yarn. This would be what I would be using. So let me just paste this here and then execute it. So now it installs the NX Cloud library. And then directly configures it for me. And so now if I rerun the affected test, it will now test all of the libraries which are in my workspace because we changed some fundamental infrastructure here, like some core configuration libraries. So NX needs to test everything again because we might have installed a package, right? And so once that it has been installed, I could actually simulate as if I was a coworker, right? So some of my coworkers already executed this the day before. The cache is distributed in NX Cloud. So I'm going to actually clear that cache and re-execute it again. And so now you can see the run is basically immediate because like all of the projects got pulled down from the remote cache. And you also get a nice view, some more information basically on NX Cloud about the view, what got built, whether that was a cache hit or not, and much more. So what we cover basically is how apps and libs basically differentiate NX from traditional workspaces, how you can define boundary rules to improve that architecture and basically guard against like some spaghetti referencing. Also how you can visualize dependency graphs, like dependencies with the dependency graph, the scaffolding abilities via the generators, which are super powerful because like you have already generators which we couldn't show due to the time limitation, like setups for Cypress, for Jest, for Storybook, which automatically generates your stories out of your components and much more. And then finally, obviously, the speed improvements via the affected commands and also the distributed caching by NX Cloud. But as I mentioned, we really just like scratched the surface, right? There's much more to explore. So these are some of the core information which you can use, like our nx.dev website, NX app for the NX Cloud part. And by the way, for NX Cloud, you can always get started with it. Like it's completely free. You don't have to use any credit card. So you get 5 hours per month saved for free. And then obviously you can opt in to actually pay for more as you like the product. There's also our Novel YouTube channel, the official videos of our Novel YouTube channel, and also an egghead course, which is completely free, which you can use to dive in more into the details of how NX works. So to get started again, like use npx create NX workspace to get a new fresh workspace setup. That obviously gives you the most benefits. But if you would like just to try it out, like especially if you are interested in the whole caching capabilities of NX, you can also use the npx add NX to monorepo to get started. And it will convert, for instance, an existing yarn workspace and enhance it with NX capabilities. And here are a couple links which explain basically how it works. And we also, for instance, converted a storybook repository and also the Remotion repository. So definitely check those out. So thanks for your attention. And if you have any questions, definitely connect with me on Twitter. Shoot your questions to me on Twitter and let's connect there. Thanks.